Welcome to this Asia Global podcast, brought to you by the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host, Alejandro Reyes, the Institute's Director of Knowledge Dissemination. In our programs here in Hong Kong and online, and in the content that we produce, we focus on presenting Asian perspectives on global issues. Subscribe to AsiaGlobal Online, our weekly digital journal, by going to the AsiaGlobal Online or the AsiaGlobal Institute website. And follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Now, this podcast is part of our Meet the Authors series, where we have a conversation with contributors to AsiaGlobal Online and other publications of the Institute. Joining me now from another part of Hong Kong, Causeway Bay, is Jason Yip, one of the 2020-21 Asia Global Fellows of the Asia Global Institute. Jason is the Chief Executive Officer of MWYO, a think and do tank on youth policy in Hong Kong. After working as an investment bank financial analyst, he changed his career to work on humanitarian issues in underprivileged countries. Before returning to Hong Kong in 2019, Jason was the regional head of the unit at the Government Affairs and Donor Relations Division of the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, covering China, Malaysia, and Singapore. During his tenure, Jason worked in Geneva to develop dialogue and mobilize resources with the member states to the Geneva Convention. He had previously been stationed in Palestine, Afghanistan, and Myanmar as a delegate to implement humanitarian interventions. He also contributed to various emergency relief initiatives, including for the 2008 earthquake in China's Sichuan province, and the Rohingya migrant crisis in the Andaman Sea in 2015. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from this university, the University of Hong Kong, and a master's degree in international relations from Waseda University in Japan, which he earned with a scholarship from the government of Japan. In 2018, Jason was awarded a Medal of Honor by the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government and was selected as one of the year's 10 outstanding young persons by the Junior Chamber International Hong Kong. So Jason, welcome. Thanks for being our guest.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Great. Now, in your Asia Global Online article, which appeared in mid-August and is still trending on our website, you wrote that with the withdrawal of US military forces from Afghanistan and the collapse of the Washington-supported government in Kabul, the Taliban moved rather quickly and effortlessly to retake control of the country. The Central Asian nation is heading into a new yet familiar chapter in its tortured history that Taliban had been in control previously. You served there from 2013 to 2015. And in your article, you reflected on the unfolding situation, which is still, of course, we're still seeing how things are going in the news, and you considered the perspectives and concerns of ordinary Afghan people whom you know. So take us back to your time in Afghanistan. What was it like? What were your clearest memories of your period there from 2013 to 2015?
Thank you for the question. Compared to the time today, the biggest difference, of course, in the past when we worked with in Afghanistan, we called the Taliban the shadow government, and today become the official government. It's kind of like a big joke or like a drama to me. So when I was working there back in 2013, for whatever operations we need to launch in the field, of course, we always focus on the needs of the people. But for the security of the people and for the security of our own team, we always need to make notification at that moment, we named the armed groups called the armed opposition, because for the official government, we cannot recognize the existence of Taliban, but at the same time, they did exist in the country. They have control pretty much out of the urban area. Let's say in the rural area. In those days, is almost fully controlled by the armed opposition, which was the Taliban. Of course, you have the international forces. They have control here and there in the provincial center. But normally, the situation was whenever you step out from the provincial center, most of the areas in the suburbs, in the rural area, completely in the hands of these kinds of armed groups. Sometimes it may not necessarily related to the Taliban, because in Afghanistan, there are many more different armed groups by themselves claiming the control over some territory. So it was quite a complicated process, because whenever you need to send your convoy, or you need to send your team over to a certain area, you have to make notification here and there. That means at the same time you have to build relations with a lot more different armed groups. I would compare it with the situation of Syria in the period in the same periods like 2013 to 2015. Just too many armed groups working in the country.
Right. Now, you mentioned here the rural-urban divide.
Exactly.
Talk a bit more about that, because for outsiders, when we listen to or read reports about Afghanistan or watch videos, typically we only know about Kabul, and we think, oh, well, that's where all the action is and where a majority of people might be. But indeed, it's very important to understand that rural-urban divide when trying to understand the dynamics of politics and society in Afghanistan.
Yep. I think most of the time when we talk about Kabul, the national capital, and all the provincial center, where the national military or the international military force have put all their defense or control over the area. But most of the time life was pretty normal. I would say you could go to a restaurant, you could do your business. You have people selling things along the street. Everything was normal. But when you step out from the urban area, that is where most of the actions happen. The international forces may launch the night raid or the operations against certain target they need to catch or arrest. So it was quite volatile in most of the villages. Casualty is quite high in certain provinces. In those days, we talk about mostly Kandahar in the southern Afghanistan, and in the central Afghanistan, you have Ghazni or Helmand state, province. This is where the international forces or the Afghan army at that moment will launch their cleansing operations to catch most of the military, the armed oppositions. But it doesn't mean you are living in the urban area that you are free from all these kinds of violence or military operation. The armed opposition, which was the Taliban in those days, they will launch the typical suicide attack. That is the different nature of conflict. So in the rural area, it's the traditional face-to-face kinds of military operations. But in the urban area, you have most of the time the spontaneous suicide attack that you have to watch out whenever you are outside important government buildings, or you are in certain restaurants that normally international workers they gather. So that was the difference. And I would say that creates a momentum difference between the rural area and the urban also. The Westerns in the urban areas kind of a bit more favorable to the national regime or the international forces, because their life pretty normal. Of course, they have better life than 20 years ago during the last Taliban regime. But for those residents or population in the rural area, they felt completely the opposite, because that is where most of the conflicts happened. And at the same time, because of their I don't want to say it's the associations or affiliation with the Taliban, but most of the time it's more like a proximity, or they are under the control of the Taliban forces. So they were under most of the investigation or arrest. You had a lot of arrest operations by the international forces in the rural area. So that's why somehow those residents in the rural area are a bit more, I would say, with the momentum against the international forces. Somehow they have more empathy or sympathy towards the Taliban.
Well, so that's very interesting. So again, in large part, when you read the media or the reporting now, there is maybe the impression that all of a sudden the Taliban are back and everybody is afraid. But in fact, you make the point that in some ways it's more about peace and stability and who can deliver that to people.
Yeah.
And for many in the rural areas, the Taliban actually represent the possibility of more peace, more stability.
I won't put it that way. I won't put it that way. But I would say it's the option between the two evil and which one is less evil, I would say.
Right.
Anyway, for the resident in the rural area, they have no choice. They are living in the area controlled by the Taliban. But you have another forces trying to invade or trying to fight against the other one. So to them, the troublemaker is the international forces. So I mean, I'm not here to try to create the impression the Taliban is better than the other one. But for the Afghan, they have quite a strong, I would say, feeling towards their own people. So they always have a question why the international forces have to come here. And of course, for people remember the history, then you remember the 9/11 in New York that happened, and then you have the Americans declare to invade the country. But then to the rural area, that New York is somewhere too far for them. For them, their life was the same during the last Taliban regime, and actually become worse after the American arriving, because that's where most of the military actions happen. So if they have a choice, they would say, come on, our life in the rural area is always the same. Why now become more difficult? And you have the drone flying over every day. They're working in the field and suddenly they got shot by the drone. So to them, they have a lot of questions. Of course, this is understandable.
Yes. What about the narrative about the very harsh application of Sharia law and how do you sense that people that you've been in touch with are feeling about that? Because of course, you brought out very well this kind of ambivalence. The main concern is wanting some kind of peace and stability, and but then of course. The Taliban are known, at least in the outside world, for this kind of strict rule. And whether they've changed their spots, if you will, I mean, are being providing a kinder, gentler approach now is still open to question.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the very strict implementation of the religious practice, most of the people, of course, will jump to the discussions of the female right, the women right. That is, personally, I'm not going to represent anyone, but if you ask me, I have to give a credit for what the Americans have done pretty appropriately or well in the context of Afghanistan is they have definitely elevated the status of women in the urban area. I have to say in the urban area because in the rural area is another situation. But but at the same time, it puts me as an individual to question a lot or to self-reflect a lot when I was in Afghanistan. I would say this kind of practice have been in Afghanistan for quite some time. Sometimes I didn't really know whether it's a religious practice or it's some tribal practice within Pashtun culture already for long. Because I think that the Taliban running of rule or their practice of governance is kind of a mix of Islam at the same time with some Pashtun tribal tribal features. So, of course, if we are trying to use the universal standards to comment, or they are far from satisfactions or even problematic, I would say. But to the people themselves, they have been accepting these kinds of practice in the rural area and whatever. Sometimes I really don't know how to comment, because even in Chinese we have a saying that when we go to a new context, we have to respect the rule. Yes, sometimes there's some rules that for outsiders like us very difficult to accept and digest. But for the context of Afghanistan, I don't know how to comment. But definitely, I have to say, for my friends in the urban areas, for my colleagues, they are ladies. They have been working in the office. They do appreciate the change of situation and momentum from 2001, and then after 2001, you start seeing them working in the office. They can go out with friends in restaurant, and they feel they have their individual right. To them, yes, definitely the presence of America was a good thing. So that's why you see a lot of ladies or whatever, or their family in the urban area, they did worry with the return of the Taliban. But Professor, you hit on one very interesting phenomenon that I want to highlight also. I think that happened in a lot of so-called battlefield or humanitarian context. Over the last 2 decades, most of the international media or international organizations, they focus in Kabul or in Syria, in Damascus, or in area like Aleppo in Syria. I think this is the phenomenon in the media sector, or media world, or humanitarian world. Is like people just go to the hotspot, to the easiest or easily accessible spot, and they start reporting. Because when you need to cross the front line or whatever, you need to get a lot of consents or notifications in the field that sometimes is difficult for organization to obtain these days. Why? I mean, I want to explain a little bit. Yeah. What happened in history when human was fighting in a war situation in, let's say, 50 years ago or 60 years ago? It was still between countries, country to country. So it's somehow there's still some gentleman agreement you can negotiate. But what happened over the last 2-3 decades? War had become a very interesting phenomenon. Sometimes it's one country against maybe some groups, sometimes it's one network against another network.
And these could be non-state actors, right?
Exactly, it's non-state. Sometimes it's not even existing physically. It can be a network mobilized by internet and whatever. So I would say this thing is very difficult for journalists or humanitarian organizations, especially those very small and spontaneous ones. When they land on the context, to negotiate or to find out the change of command of any groups in order to gain access to some really frontline areas difficult. So sometimes I think we have to exercise certain questions or skepticism in the news. I'm not saying they're not true, but I would say it's reflect only part of the reality. We cannot take it granted. It's like, oh, Kabul is like that, so the whole country should be like Kabul. It's not. It's never the same.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's interesting, because I think what you're asking for is, in certain ways, some humility in our analysis, right? Some sense of perspective, which I think is very important. Tell me, when you, in the recent weeks and since August, watching the withdrawal of the United States international forces, and also the mad crush for people to leave, and the attempts to get people out. What was your own feeling about the situation? And doubtless you must have known people who wanted to leave or have left. What are your own personal feelings and reflections on that?
I have 2 stories to share with you. Because I think my personal feeling cannot represent well the situation, because I look at it from far away now. I better use the perspective of the people on the ground. Right. I remember when you asked me to write that article, I was trying to call some of my friends to have their view or their perspective in order to enrich the writing that I was about to submit to AGI. I remember it was beginning of August. I was talking to my previous colleagues who was my good assistant in Gasly. That was one of the hotspots that we always talk about. My colleague Bilal was living there, so I have a Zoom call with him like what we are doing now. It was very late at night. I think it was around 9 or 8, something like that. And over the conversation
in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan,
yeah,
Afghanistan. So it was late for me.
Yes,
it was still okay for him.
Sure. Right.
So and during our conversation, suddenly Bilal was telling me, oh, Jason, there was an announcement. Our Taliban just took over my city. It was so calm. But it was calm in the sense that it was silent outside. But you can definitely feel the momentum of doubt, of uncertainty about the future. Although my colleagues have been living through the last Taliban regime and also with the so-called the new government of Afghanistan regime, but with the change of government, it's definitely an uncertainty to them. I think another uncertainty to my colleagues at that moment is this have been happening again and again in Afghanistan. Like it's not like one person or one party coming back, then the whole country will be in good shape or be in one piece. Normally, with the re-emergence or the returning or the new actor coming into the scenes, you stir up a lot of in Afghanistan we call them militias. You have too many warlords controlling here and there in Afghanistan. That is what he worried. If Taliban came into the scene and they could control everything and then everything's stable, they live again. Okay, it's okay, lost some democracy is not nice, lost some human rights not nice, but to them, stability, peace, like what you mentioned, is more important. But Bilal's worry more about what happened among other warlords in the context. If they are not happy with the allocations of resources, are we going back to the civil war again? So that is the story of Bilal. But I have another colleague that he was much older than me. He's like around 70 already, a very wise man, was a teacher in the university in Kabul. And then I was asking him, oh, are you leaving? And then he was telling me, Jason, it is the 4th crisis in Afghanistan I have experienced in my life. How many times I can escape from this country? So he actually sat back. He was about to publish a book on Persian and on the Dari culture, heritage, and something like that. He said, "I'm 70 already. For me, it's like a drama, one after another one in my country. And I don't think I have any intentions to live anywhere, but I was happy to stay here to see how this story will go again." I think different people have different momentum. The younger one, probably they have education since the arrival of American. They may believe is the end of the world. But I would take the second friend as an example. Probably in the first crisis he experienced when he was young in Afghanistan, he thought it was the end of history, the end of the country also. Right. But then he went through the 4th one already. So I would say we cannot easily draw a conclusion what is the momentum towards the returning of the Taliban. Different people have different feeling. That is a very old school of thinking. But I would say we need to give it some time. We need to give it some time. And with the continuation of the last government supported by Washington, it was not a solution to the country either. Conflict never stopped from 2001 because most of the international watchers like us here in Hong Kong, we always thought, oh, with the arrival of the US in Afghanistan, the country should be at least in peace from 2001. But no, actually not. Conflict happened immediately from 2001 and lasting until 2021 today. Right. So it was not a solution to the Afghan either.
And that essentially what has happened is there was the security vacuum.
Exactly.
You talk about it. Since all of that, and now it's October. I mean, since that period.
Sorry, 2 months. Yeah.
Have you had any further news about the situation from the people that you know?
Yep. Some of my friends who used to be working in international organizations, they were interrogated. I mean, they were questioned
Right.
by the new government right now. But at least physically, they didn't suffer anything. They know they are on the list. They worry, but they say everything pretty normal. I mean, economically, you don't need me to mention too much because from the news every day, you already hear like if there's no more humanitarian assistance or investment in Kabul or in the country, it will collapse. So I would say, you you don't see the country in chaos at this moment. Now, I think it is the challenge to the Taliban new government how much normal life they can resume, or how much control they can actually settle. The control I don't mean is about the people, because for the Afghan they cannot launch any revolutions or violence at this stage, but it's more like you still have a lot of different militias or warlords in the country. Or even within the religious group, you have the Taliban, you have the Haqqani network, and you have the affiliate groups of the Islamic states. So now it's a challenge, it's a test to the internal diplomacy of the Taliban, or the wisdom, how they can settle all the interests among all these groups. Of course, Professor, you mentioned the political, the security vacuum also at this moment. So you have still the international players in the location. Of course, US have been withdrawn, but I don't think they fully want to be away. They may put themselves in Qatar or some neighboring country to watch the situation. But for China have a stake over there because they share the border with their Xinjiang province, and you have Pakistan and India and Iran always try to have a say over the context. I think now Taliban really need to show that they are different from the last governance they were doing 20 years ago. They are a bit wiser. They have more tools and skills to engage everyone. I think I'm not saying that they are perfect regime or they are up to international standards, but if you look at their narratives this time compared to their narratives 20 years ago, at least you are happy to see they are a bit more flexible. They are a bit more, I would say, smarter than last time. They want to talk. They try to engage parties from different nationalities. They still open for that, although there are certain rules they don't want to change. Let's say the suppression or the things they do against ladies. So, I would say I'm curious to see how they are going to run the situation.
Well, what's your let me put it this way. What's your best case scenario? I guess what would be your hope for where things will go?
I don't say my hope. My best guess. You see Afghanistan instability with Taliban aligned with a few regional powers internationally, and then locally in terms of civil society, you still see a lot of unpleasant suffering of the ladies, and civil organization may not be as active as before. But at least they have stability. So now it's going back to the questions whether we want Afghanistan to have the so-called American-style democracy, but then you have armed conflict here and there every day, or they can actually live in peace for some time, but with the compromise of certain human. I don't know the best answer, because in the world today, it seems we have a lot of doubt toward what is the best social system in the world here and there. So I would say from my Afghan friends, of course, those they escape, they think they have made a good decisions. But for those who have decided to stay in the country, actually their demand or their wish is very, I would say, humble, or even a bit a bit harsh to accept. It's like I mean, to them, not to me. It's like, you know what, Jason, I just want peace for some time. So we have been fighting for 3-4 decades already. Give us like 5 years of stability. I want to go to a garden with my children without issue. I still want to do my life normally. Whether we can have a gathering or protest and whatever. You know what? If we can survive without dying, that's already good enough. Probably this is what some of my friends are thinking.
Now, Jason, tell us a bit about your background, because I don't want to generalize, but often, in Hong Kong, it is rare, or it's not often that, let me put it that way, it's not often that one comes across a young person with such a kind of international background and outlook. And you call yourself a battlefield humanitarian, and you've already pretty much explained what that means. Yeah. So tell us, how did you get into this business, as it were? How did that happen? I mean, you were doing what, business administration at Hong Kong U?
Yeah,
so and then you were in the financial industry,
doing equity trading.
So how did then suddenly awaken in you this idea? I'm going to go out to these conflict zones.
Yeah, there was a calling. Everyone say, did you have an internal calling, or someone aspire you or inspire you, whatever? I think it was. I mean, everyone know the Asian values. You get into the so-called best university in your context, and you should get a good job, buy an apartment and a car, and support your family. It's a typical Asian story. It's not only in Hong Kong, I'm sure in China, Japan, even in Southeast Asia, everywhere thinking the same. Yeah. But at that moment, I got a chance to have my first internship in Kenya when I was in the university. That was actually my first time stepping out from Hong Kong. I didn't have any chance to go anywhere. My family was very humble with a background. So I worked in an internship in Kenya with colleagues from all Europeans or American country. I was the only Asian. So at the end of the internship, there was a very inspiring moment.
What was the kind of work you were doing then in Kenya?
There was a internship by the World Bank doing microcredit in the urban slum. Okay. Yeah, so you come across the so-called high incident rates of HIV positive, the extreme poverty. Although Kenya was not that bad in African standard, but for me, coming from this Hong Kong, that was shocking to me already. Right. So. So at that moment, at the end of the internship, I have with another 6 interns. They were all saying that, you know what? After I return to my country, I want to be a diplomat of my country. I want to work as an international civil servant in UN, whatever. Then I was asking myself, okay, Jason, what you were thinking to yourself? I was thinking, I'm not trying to look down Big Four accounting firm or investment bank, but I was talking to myself, oh my God, all I know was only investment bank and accounting firm. My perspective was so narrow and limited. I felt like a cultural shock. I studied for 20-some years like all my colleagues here, but why my perspective just like that? That was shocking to me. It's like there's a much wider or larger world outside. And with this level of development in Hong Kong, I then ask myself what education means to us. If I have the university give me a chance to see all these global problems in Africa, then if I carry all this perspective and moving back to Hong Kong and look for a good job and just enjoy my life, then I would say I kind of defeat the purpose of having an education. Having education sometimes you help the world to solve problems, right? But I think in a super commercialized city like Hong Kong, we are only solving our personal problem. We just want to settle our house. Household unit in Hong Kong is difficult to achieve this day, everyone knows. But anyway, at that moment, I thought, okay, I want to give it a meaning of my education. The university gave me access to see the things in the world. I want to get my hands dirty and see what I can do for it. So that's how I move on. Great.
Now, you actually then have had quite varied experiences overseas, because besides Afghanistan, you been in Palestine,
Myanmar,
Myanmar,
Syria, Lebanon.
right? So tell us a bit about maybe a brushstroke on each one and your sort of impressions about that kind of. I mean, truly, I mean, if you think about it, the roll call of conflict zones in recent memory, you've been there. So
yeah, I would say I went through a few conflicts or the historical moment over the last 10 years. Sometimes I would say I'm the bad luck of everything because when for whatever context I step in, there's a big crisis over there. Even when I returned to Hong Kong, the year I came back, there was a crisis in Hong Kong. So
we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
So, but I would say the more I have seen different natures of these kinds of conflict or social or communal violence or armed conflict, whatever you call it, I would say as an outsider, it's very easy to jump to some simple conclusions. We can always comment and criticize certain government leaders. You haven't done your job well, you make a lousy decision, this and that. But I would say for any conflict, there's a very contextual factors that we need to understand. Sometimes it's not like a conflict just breaking out for a particular spot of time. It's actually with a long history just leading to the happening of that situations. I always like to use the example of Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar as an example. I know I'm jumping to a black hole now, opening this story. At that moment, the whole world trying to criticize her for violating the purpose of the Nobel Prize Peace Award and whatever. Yeah, of course, she could have done better. There's lots more she can do. But I was trying to look at the country from another perspective when I was working there. I'm only working in the Rohingya area. But at the same time, Myanmar have 5 other armed conflicts going on for different reasons. Some of them is the local military war, or some of them are religious things and whatever. But you have one similarities, like for another 4th conflict is mainly related to the Buddhist Burmese or the Buddhist Myanmar people. And you have only the one on the western side of the country is related to the Muslim. So Aung San Suu Kyi make a very interesting comments like, yes, I can do whatever I can to protect the Rohingyas, the 1 million of them. But then I have another 20 million something people will be in crisis after. How can I make the decision? I think it's not easy, honestly. It's not easy. It's very easy for us as international watcher and say, you should do that, you should do that. But then when you're running a country that was already very fragile, that's already in trouble for decades, sometimes to settle a conflict and whatever, you cannot have a quick solutions that I want it today and have it done tomorrow. So now, after 2-3 years, Aung San Suu Kyi herself is in trouble again. Okay. So, and no one really remember what she was trying to do. I'm not a big supporter or fans or trying to say good things about her, but I just want to say nowadays with internet, it's very easy for us to make some simplified comment without deep analysis or understanding of the situation. And that kind of fast food comment is actually make the world even more divided about the situation, because we don't really put ourselves into the context to see how complicated it is in order to manage a situation.
Interesting. Specifically about the Rohingya, I did some work on the Rohingya when I was in the Canadian government, and that in and of itself is because different nations are involved. There's a lot of politics. There's the ethnic and identity issues. There's the religious aspect to it. So it's really quite complex. And so
it's actually very interesting. I come across a very interesting situation when I was in Rakhine State. Because when I was there, you have most of the international organization or international human rights fighter that that are saying that it is a communal conflict between the Muslim and the Buddhist. So it's religion is the problem. But then because most of the Rohingyas so happen they are Muslim, so they are kind of watched or separated by the Myanmar regime and whatever. So, but I came across a very interesting situation. I was in the Rakan airport. I was landing together with a Dutch Muslim. So completely Caucasian, European, but just a Muslim. He could enter the state without issue. Then, so that brings to another discussions, whether it was a religious-driven conflict or actually it's a very old-school racial or ethnicity conflict. I think it's very complicated. Probably the government themselves have not properly defined what kind of conflict it is, but maybe they just don't want to have the Rohingyas in their country, because anyway, they are groups of people have been living in the area shared by the Bangladesh and Myanmar. So no one can really define what kind of the nature of the problem it is.
Well, indeed, I guess logistically speaking, I mean, it is a migration issue, right?
It's a migration issue, and then actually the Rohingya is the mix of race of all the people over there for hundreds of years. So I don't know whether it's the religion issue or the ethnicity issue. Anyway, it's a migration issue. You're right.
but I find it interesting that it seems almost like the attention of the world has shifted, and that there was more attention to the Rohingya maybe a couple of years ago. And now, even though the problem still exists, it is a major refugee issue. It does seem, at least from media, that there's less attention paid. And as you pointed out, one forgets that it's all about people. It's all about families. It's all about people who are not really caring about the geopolitics of it all, but they just want safety and security.
Exactly. Actually, for all the locations that we just mentioned in the conversations today, their problems or their conflict are still going on. But it just seems like the well-developed world can forget things quite easily. Think about Palestine. The conflict, the stress of the situation is still there. Syria a bit better, but you can still see a lot of humanitarian challenge over there. Rohingyas issue. I think Myanmar now is not only about Rohingyas issue. You have the whole country in trouble, and Afghanistan is also like changing the momentum of the country. So the world issue have not really solved. The world have not really solved any of this issue. It's just every day we have new agenda, we have new topics and subjects are jumping to the scene. So we just simply think, okay, we haven't heard it for a while. Probably it's okay, it's improving. No, it's not. We're just not paying attention on it at all.
Now, let's talk a bit about Hong Kong.
Okay.
Because as you mentioned, you came back in 2019, and I could argue that what greeted you was sort of a conflict zone.
There's most of the people say it that way.
Right. And now you're actually working very hard to engage young people, because young people were really at the core of the protest movement and continue to be. Although we're in a different dispensation now with things like the national security law.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, having spent a fair bit of time now engaging with young people and trying to understand what their issues are?
Firstly, I would say, like what I mentioned, the Hong Kong protests in 2019 came with a lot of factors. Of course, the government could have handled the social momentum a bit better. Of course, there are lots of chances for them to cool down the issue, but they miss it. These are all unfortunate series of consequences or sequential decisions. But at the same time, if you allow me to say it, because I always offend the young people in this way, it's like, I would say somehow they were too emotional also. They went beyond certain limits. If we want to say there was good moment for the government to calm down the situation, I think there was also good moments for the I don't want to say the young people only, because among the protesters there were adults also. So I would just use protesters to represent all of them. There's some good moment for the protesters to scale down a little bit in order to have better room for negotiations or discussions to settle the conflict. But in that kind of social situation, everyone just missed the chance one by one. I think it's a very collective, unfortunate situation to the city here. So now I would say, after talking to most of them, not most of them, a lot of them for 2 years, I'm not that I would say pessimistic about the situations of Hong Kong. Of course, you have the new national security law implemented in the country. You have the red line here and there. But to me, between the red line, there's still some room for civil society to develop or to navigate. So to the Hong Kong youth specifically, I still have hope from them. When you talk to them, although they are a little bit feeling hurt, they were hurt by the situation. They felt they lost the conflict. They say they thought the elite in the city never listened to them, but they still trying to. Most of them, of course, some of them they lost the moment, they lost the motivations. They are a bit pessimistic about themselves in this city. So that's why you have some of them are migrating to other situations. But for those who chose to stay here, they reorganize their energy. Now they say, okay, yeah, it's not the same, but I can still develop myself. I want to make myself stronger. Hopefully one day I can contribute back to Hong Kong in other way, not the same way like what they have done in 2019. So I think actually it's a good sign. Everyone try to reorganize themselves. Life have to go on, no matter how difficult the situation. But I would rather make one recommendation to the administration, the government, is sooner or later, they need to really consider how they can reconcile with the society. You cannot keep putting on resources, keep watching the youth or the protester what may try to do next. I would say I would rather spend the social resources to develop this city in a better way, when all of us can talk to each other. We resolve all the hatreds or misunderstanding towards each other. But instead of just investing money on monitoring everyone, that is not the way of running a city.
Is that about economic opportunity? Is that about ensuring that young people have a sense that they can get good jobs, that they could potentially own their own home, that the cost of living, is it those issues? And of course, there are also those who talk about the identity issue, the idea that as Hong Kong, regardless of the protests, becomes closer and more integrated with the mainland, that Hong Kong people were seeing their own identity perhaps being undermined or diminished in some way. What is your sense?
So when you say integrations, let's take the most controversial topic, the Greater Bay Area, as a discussion, because now we are not talking about integrating with the whole country. Let's first integrate with the Greater Bay Area first. Yes, we do see quite a big hesitation from the youth to, let's say, to move to, to integrate themselves in the Greater Bay Area. My office have done a survey last 2019 and this year. We have only 13% of those interviewees aged under 35 to show interest that they want to work in the Greater Bay Area. That they have a few reasons for that. Of course, firstly, it's about the impressions of the society over there on the other side of the border. Another one is the free flow of information. And of course, you have a bit about the identity issue. I think all these factors, the government have to deal with it. But at the same time, to the young adult, to the youth, I really want them to think about that also. Let's forget the identity issue at the moment. Yes, Hong Kong Chinese, Shanghai Chinese, Beijing Chinese are always different because the geographical location is different, the social status are different. We can never
even the dialect is different. I mean, these are
exactly
issues,
the
right?
dialect, the foods are different, everything
Right.
different. But I want to put it that way. Hong Kong is Hong Kong look big, but we are actually a very tiny economy. So we cannot actually survive by ourselves, just stay very in an enclosed circle here ourselves. We always need to reach out. That is the destiny of small economy. But I would say instead of looking GBA as a destination, I would rather the government or the adult society actually thinking GBA is actually the starting point. We all need to reach out. Of course, the youth can go to UK, the youth can go to Singapore and anywhere to make their living, to try their fortune. But what is the purpose of GBA is like, there's a difference, but at least culturally speaking, or in terms of proximity, it's less costly to most of the youth here. If they want to test themselves and they go to the other side of the GBA area, and if they know how to mix and mingle with the people there, then I would suggest that, you know what, let's try go to the Shanghai area. Let's go to the Beijing area. And later, if you want to go to Central Asia, go to Central Asia or go back to the Southeast Asia, anywhere. But GBA is a testing ground at very low cost for the youth in Hong Kong to test themselves, whether they can actually live in different contexts, even the context with different style of the regime. Different flows of information. Because having living in different country, I kind of feeling like, okay, I live in a very liberal Hong Kong in those days, not now, but at the same time, I live in a very restricted Afghanistan and Syria and whatever. Yes, there's some difference, there's some inconvenience or disappointment, but at the same time, it's also a very interesting experience to test whether you can survive in all different kinds of situations. Right. I think that's how Hong Kong became successful in history. Like we used to be able to deal with all kinds of people, all kinds of economy, and all kinds of regimes. But I think the conflict in terms of political struggle and discussion over the last 20 years make we as a Hong Kong people kind of scared of talking to people of different perspectives. We're just getting very, very inward looking. I think it's time to reach out again. And GBA may not be the final destination, but it's definitely a good testing ground for us to see whether we can apply or develop our skills in a different context.
Well, let me ask you this question, because I'm confronted by it myself, because essentially what you're articulating is a kind of pragmatic approach to life. I mean, these are the facts of life, and then you kind of make do, or you live with and try to do your best. But there are those who will counter and say, "Oh, well, that's weakness. That's surrender. That's kowtowing."
Probably.
And then they'll say, then it becomes meaningless, or at least the pragmatism is not true to yourself. In other words, that and then that is a suppression of your own initiative and freedom. How would you feel about that? Because the pragmatist lot is not a happy one sometimes.
I mean, of course, no one can make everyone happy and whatever. But you are right. I'm kind of like my Afghan friend that we have talked about. I'm not myself experiencing or living in a lot of. I'll put it another way. It's like I have gone through a few conflicts here and there, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Myanmar, whatever. And I would say human being is always full of argument, ideology, and conflict. You have never a situations can make everyone in peace or in agreement of everything. Society is always full of argument and conflict. So whatever you fight for as a revolutions and whatever, probably you have a dream and and think about is really perfect as a pictures. But when you can implement it, at the end, you still find opposition here and there. It's always there. There's always argument. There's always some imperfection in any system that we are living in. Then it's your choice and our choice, like how you want to deal with it. Someone will keep fighting. Yeah, probably this year I'm fighting for agenda A, then next year I'm fighting for agenda B. You always have something to fight for. But for me, probably after seeing all this argument and conflict, I'm a surrender, or like my Afghan friend. You know what? I just want to live peacefully and happily with my family. I want to develop simple life. And I would say for a policy maker, we always need to be ready for some oppositions, that we need to have the openness to listen to them. But at the same time, as policymaker, you're running as a country or a territory. What you need to ask yourself is whether the majority of the people are really meeting their living expectation. They are not in any difficulty in terms of surviving. I think in Hong Kong or in South Korea recently, I read some reports about, yeah, you have a very glamorous city, you have a very high standard of living, but at the same time, you have the new generation living in very deteriorating situations that they cannot compare to their
so like precarity, living a precarious life. Right?
Exactly. So of course, democracy is a dream everyone wants, but then I would say, are we jumping too fast when you cannot even solve the problem immediately facing the next generation? And we think democracy can solve all these issues. Afghanistan jumped all the way from the Taliban regime and suddenly to democracy have a vote. I have a very interesting story here I want to share with you, Professor. It's actually with Bilal. In 2014, that was the first presidential elections of Afghanistan after President Karzai. Karzai was arranged by Americans in the country. And so I remember right before the election, we were like, most of the international organizations withdraw their expatriates. My organization kept a few in the context. I was one of them. So on the day of the election, you have the explosion here and there. And then I was working with Bilal, and then at the very late of the evening, I was saying that Bilal, you need to go and vote. Then I drove him over there. Then Bilal was voting, and after that I asked Bilal, how did you feel? I'm not trying to downplay the importance of democracy, but what Bilal was telling me was actually very, it's a question that I have been thinking long in all these years. He was saying that, you know what, Jason, I have been like fighting here and there and keep arguing, and for my country, democracy here and this and that. Yes, I thought this vote was important for me, and I voted. But the moment I voted, I asked myself, then what is next? What does it mean to me? I still cannot go out to a garden with my son and daughter without the potential risk of a suicide attacker. So what is that for with all these votes? So after seeing all this and listening to all these people, Professor, I really have no definite answer whether it is actually better to be a freedom fighter, or as you may mention, that I compromise myself for stability and whatever. I just say, you know what? Human society is full of diversity. Choose whatever suitable for you. Choose whatever makes you happy. We don't need to oblige others to follow our pattern, right? Because I think that is not what the 21st century is meant to be.
Right. Thank you. Jason, you've been very generous with your time. I have just one last question. Yeah. Given the pandemic and everything that's been going on, the protests and the work that you're doing with young people, well, then what's next? I mean, you seem, you know, I met you maybe over a year ago online when you were applying for the fellowship. And it struck me that your natural habitat, if I could put it that way, is out in the field as a battlefield humanitarian.
Yeah.
Is that where you want to eventually go back to, or what's in it? What's the outlook for Jason Yip?
I have been, people say I have been very generous to share a big part of my life with people all over the world. So for the next 5-10 years, I want to have a very selfish part of myself. I want to only share my life with my family here in Hong Kong, especially my personal family, my mother. So I haven't really lived with her for more than 15 years, and she's getting old. So I want to spend some decent time with her. But at the same time, I always have a thinking like, when other country was in trouble, I was working there for the last decade. So now my city is in a bit crossroad. Maybe I cannot contribute much, but I want to stay here, have a look for whenever and whatever I can contribute and make a recommendation. I want to stay here to do whatever I can to try to contribute to the better direction of it.
It's hard to travel anyway from Hong Kong.
Yeah, we are all trapped. We are all
So
trapped.
we're a bit trapped here. But anyway, it's you make what you can, right? You do what you can.
Exactly.
Jason, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. I really appreciate it. I commend your article on AsiaGlobal Online to our listeners. Again, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And thank you, Jason. It's been a pleasure to have a conversation, and good luck, and
my pleasure.
See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye.